I'm now going to turn to Vasily Grossman. These are two of his books, Life and Faith and Everything Flows. To get some idea of what Orwell achieved in 1984, it's worth comparing it with the work of an author writing almost in parallel with Orwell, Vasily Grossman. He died in 1964. Orwell and Grossman were completely unaware of each other's work. Yet there are striking parallels between 1984 and Life and Faith, published in English in 1985, and his uncompleted novel Ever-Flowing, show whereas Orwell draws on his imagination, Grossman writes from fact. One common element of both is Lysenko. In Grossman's novel, the fictitious Victor Pavlovich Shrum, a physicist and member of the Academy of Sciences, is a sort of inverted Lysenko. He is, says his translator, Robert Chandler, a portrait of the author himself. In more superficial respects, Shrum is based on Lev Davidovich Landau, a brilliant physicist who was dismissed during the anti-Jewish campaigns of the early 50s in the Soviet Union. Another real-life source, I think, is probably Nikolai Vavilov. Nikolai's brother, Sergei, a physicist, became head of the Academy of Sciences. He towed the line. Whereas Nikolai, a biologist, was arrested by Stalin's secret police for disagreeing with Lysenko. He was deliberately starved to death in a prison cell. So you can see how dangerous it was to disagree with Lysenko. It's impossible to compare these books in detail here, and I'm sure you'll find it a bit too tedious that. But I'd like to mention a few passages, much abbreviated. Everyone, I'm sure, will remember Winston Smith's accidental discovery of a photograph that provided concrete evidence of a fragment of an abolished past. This is from Life and Faith. The state had the power to replay events, to transform figures of granite and bronze, to alter speeches long since delivered, to change the face in a news photograph. In 1984, Winston Smith rewrites history. Day by day, and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct. In Life and Faith, a new history had been written. Even people who had lived through those years now had to relive them, transformed from brave men to cowards, from revolutionaries to foreign agents. And one of my favourite parallels, in Life and Faith, a man has recently been released from a labour camp. He'd been a proofreader on a newspaper and had spent 7 years in the camps for missing a misprint in a leading article. The typesetters had got one letter wrong in Stalin's name. Stalin, man of steel, became Stalin, man of shit. If you know a novel recently published by Simon Montefiore, Sashenka, the author adapts it to a typesetter with Solin, man of salt, instead of Stalin, man of steel. In 1984, Ampleforth is incarcerated because he says, when producing a definitive edition of the poems of Kipling, which is ironic, the idea of a definitive edition is to get at the truth, and of course this is to change it. And the poems of Kipling, in the world of 1984, I allowed the word God to remain at the end of a line. I couldn't help it. It was impossible to change the line. The rhyme was rod. Do you realise that there are only 12 rhymes with rod in the entire language? And Orwell lists them in his second literary notebook. In fact, I think there are 17, but it's a minor detail. There are many more parallels, but let me concentrate on why people confessed. Orwell owned a copy of the pamphlet Why Did They Confess, published in 1937, which discussed the trial of Karl Radek and 16 co-conspirators. 13 were executed, although curiously not Radek. There are quite a few examples, but I'm only going to give a couple. Winston's sole concern was to find what they wanted him to confess, what it was, and then confess it quickly before the bullying started anew. He confessed to the assassination of eminent party members, the distribution of seditious pamphlets, embezzlement of public funds, sale of military secrets, sabotage of every kind. He confessed that he had murdered his wife, although he knew, and his questioners must have known, that his wife was still alive. It was easier to confess to everything and implicate everybody. Now from Life and Fate. My God, I can't believe all this horror. These trials are a nightmare, but why do they confess? Why do they all confess? There's a similar scene in Montefiore's Sashenko. And this from Everflowing. These people have confessed. And if they were innocent, but had confessed anyway, that implied a different crime. It implied that they were the victims of a crime, still more terrible than that of which they were accused. Now, I'm sure you will all remember the confessions of the animals in Animal Farm. I want to return to those Ukrainian displaced persons. Remember, first the 4 pigs confess their crimes of having been in touch with Snowball, and the dogs tear out their throats. Then 3 hens are also slaughtered. And then a tiny little detail which you could easily miss. A goose confessed to secreting 6 ears of corn. Apart from the absurdity of such a confession and the terrible fate, because the goose goes the same way, of course, as the hens, those Ukrainian displaced persons would know that that was like the Ukrainian terror famine inspired by Stalin, in which 2 or 3 million people died, when to hide a grain of corn meant death. It would really get through to them immediately. A sheep confessed to urinating in the drinking pool, 2 more sheep, all slain on the spot. And so the tale of confessions and executions went on until there was a pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet. Napoleon, of course, becomes Caesar in the French edition. Reviewing Darkness at Noon in 1941, Orwell explains the reasons for these confessions. They were because common people couldn't grasp that deviation is a crime. Therefore, crimes of the sort they can understand, murder, train wrecking, and so forth, must be invented for them to confess to. Finally, no one, I think, can forget the depiction of in 1984 in the text and in screen versions of Hate Week. This is Vasily Grossman in Everflowing. Like everything else that took place in the Soviet Union, this upsurge of spontaneous fury had been conceived and planned well in advance. Stormy protest meetings were also planned in exactly the same way. As were outbursts of popular fury and emotional expressions of brotherly friendship.